Hi everyone. This video would cover arrays in VBA. Arrays are a type of variables that contain a list of values. Suppose you want to assign some variables to the name of the students in class. Then if you use arrays, then you don't need to declare each of these variables, student 1, student 2, student 3, and so on. So you declare your array once, and here's the syntax. The number in parentheses is called the subscript, and each of these variables are called elements. Here's the syntax to declare your array. You need to use dim statement, array name, the range for your subscript, and data type. The subscript range doesn't have to be declared in the beginning of the code. Suppose you don't know the number of students, then you declare this array like this, students blank parentheses as single. And next line you would understand what's the number of students. So now you know the subscript for your array and you would use it here. And in the following lines you're going to use this array. So you need to use reDim statement and specify the range for your subscript. Suppose I have these 4 values as the radius of 4 spheres. I'm going to create a code that calculates the surface area and volume of these spheres and write the output in column B and column C. First, let's try scalar variables. So here's the code. I have used this name for my subroutine. I have defined pi as 4 times arctangent of 1. I have used a for loop. So for 4 times, it would repeat this iteration for me. It would read from cell A1, A2, A3, and A4 and assign these values to variable R. It would calculate surface area and volume using these 2 equations. Then it would write the output for area in column 2, which would be B, B1, B2, B3, and B4, and it would also write the output for volume in column C from C1 to C4. And here, as I have used this single quotation mark, it will consider these lines as text. That's why these are in green. So here's the scalar variables. Now, let's declare our variables. So I would use option explicit as the first line. So this statement would pop up a message for you if you forget to declare any of the variables in your code. Now I'm gonna declare my variables R, A, V, and pi as single, dim I as integer. Now let's try this code. So I would run this code and go back to my spreadsheet. So the surface area and volume of the spheres are calculated and written here. Now what changes are needed to change these scalar values, scalar variables to arrays? So these are the changes that are needed. Now let me show an advantage of using arrays instead of scalar variables. So if you use an array, then you would be able to call for any variable in your spreadsheet. Now suppose I want the surface area for item 3. So here I have only a limited number of outputs, so I can find it here very easily. But suppose you have a large number of values here in your spreadsheet, then it would be difficult to find your specified value. So this is another advantage of using arrays. Now let me change my scalar values to arrays. So here I need to use parentheses 1 to 5, 1 to 4. I have 4 elements for radius. So I need to copy this for other arrays here. Area would be an array, volume would be an array, pi is a scalar value defined here, and I would be an integer. Other changes you need to make here: A of I, B of I, and here in the formula, again you need to insert parenthesis I, and here again I. Now you have changed your scalar variables to arrays. Now you can also, and one I here, you can call for any variable that you want. Say for example, message box A3. Now let me clear this part. And run this in code. It would calculate surface area and volume here, and it would also message box the value for A3, the surface area for item 3. So here are the changes that you need to make to change your scalar variables to arrays. Now consider this example. There are 100 student grades stored in cells B1 through B100 on the worksheet. Write a good VBA program to do the following when it is run. A. Read the cell data into an array called grades. B. Display the average of the grades in a message box. C. Compute the number of grades above the group's average and output that number to cell A5 on the current worksheet. So here's the code for this example. I have used for loop and also an if block inside my for loop. So for I, from 1 to 100, get the values from cell column B. So let me write B here. So it would get all the values from column B and assign it to this array. So suppose I have these values in column B representing the grades for 100 students. Next line, it will calculate the average. So in VBA, instead of average function, you need to use this syntax, worksheet function dot average. This is the same for maximum and minimum, worksheet function dot max, worksheet function dot mean, and some other functions work the same way. And notice that function needs to be uppercase. Then inside parentheses, you need to put your array that you want to calculate the average for. So here's the first for loop, and always make sure to include next I when you're using for loop. Then after this loop is complete, I have used this message box statement, the average grade is, and concatenation syntax, and then the mean, which has already been calculated in the for loop. Next, I have used another for loop, and first I have defined my variable num as 0. So let me change it to num of high grades. So num of high grades is 0 before I start this loop. And as I start this loop, I am trying this condition. Is the grade larger than mean? If it is greater, if this condition is true, then add 1 to num of high grade. So let me change this to num of high grades. Num of high grades. And if next I. And then after this loop is repeated for 100 times for each of the values in column B, then it would get out of this loop and would write this variable in cell A5. Num of high grades. Now let me declare my variables here. I and num of high grade. Both of them are integers. Sum is single. There's no sum here, so let me clear this. So I have declared my array and my variable mean, and both of them are single variables. And also notice that I have included the subscript range for my array. So the code is complete, and now if I run this code, it will pop up this message for me that the average grade is 74.75. Click OK. Now if I return to my spreadsheet, you can see that this second statement is also executed. So in cell A5, the average has been written. Then the number of grades which are larger than the average. So the average was 75. Let me do this again. The average was 74.75. And the number of grades which are greater than the average is 50. So 50 students got a grade larger than the mean. Now consider this example. There are 150 different objects densities stored in cells D1 through D150 on the worksheet. Write a good VBA program to do the following when it is run. A. Read the cell data into an array called density. B. Display the maximum density in the list in a message box. C. Compute the number of densities that are heavier than water, which is 1 gram per cubic centimeter. And output that number to cell C5 on the current worksheet. So suppose we have these numbers in column D for the densities. You see some of them are greater than 1, some of them are less than 1. Now here's the code. I have used 4 loops, 2 for loops. The first for loop is getting the values from from column D, from row 1 to row 150, and then after all of these 150 values are assigned to this array density, it would get out of this loop and calculate the maximum. And here is the syntax for calculating the maximum of an array. Worksheet function dot max, and then inside the parentheses you need to insert the array. Then message box, the maximum density is and the max variable. So this is for the part A and B of this example. Now for part C, I have used this for loop. So for 150 times, it would do this iteration for me. It would test this condition. If density is greater than 1, then it would add 1 to num of high density. So first I need to define my num of high density as 0, and then once this loop is run, it would add 1 whenever this condition is true. So after repeating this loop for 150 times, it would get out of this statement and it would write the num of high density in column C, row 5, which would be C5. So let me also declare my variables and arrays here. Dim I, num of high density as integer, dim density of 1 to 150 as single, dim max as single. Now let's try this code. If I run this, it would show that the maximum density is 3.82. And now if I go back to my spreadsheet, you can see that the number of densities which are greater than 1 is 133. So only these few densities on top of the column are less than 1. And from here, as you look at this column, all numbers are greater than 1. That's why we get this large number here. So this is how the code is written. And this is very similar to the previous example. And notice how we use max, mean, and average functions in VBA. Worksheet function.max.